been great to be a catalyst, but also understanding that it's driven by the right purpose, that there's a purpose behind it that is truly mine. And I think that has been something that's a struggle, but also it's excited me, is to make sure that I'm aligned on the right path of what I most want to create in the world.
Hi, I'm Tracy Lovejoy.
And I'm Shannon Lucas. We are the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to empowering catalysts to create bold, powerful change in the world.
This is our podcast, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, where we speak with Catalyst executives about ways to successfully lead transformation in large organizations.
And today I'm super excited to have Tony Martignetti with us. Hi, Tony.
Hello, how are you doing?
We're thrilled to have you here. All right, let me introduce you for our listeners. Tony is a leadership advisor, a coach, a facilitator, a best-selling author, a podcast host, and a speaker. He brings over 30 years of business and leadership experience and extreme curiosity to elevate leaders and equip them with the tools to navigate through change and unlock their true potential. Tony also hosts the Virtual Campfire podcast, which he was gracious enough to have us on as guests. He's the author of Climbing the Right Mountain, Navigating the Journey to an Inspired Life, and Campfire Lessons for Leaders, How Uncovering Our Past Can Propel Us Forward. He's been featured in Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Forbes, and so much more. We're thrilled to have you here. All right, so let's jump in. That's sort of your Cliff Notes bio, but we would love to hear from you about your catalytic journey, maybe a few career highlights that you're proud of that help us see your catalytic nature.
Wonderful. And first of all, I just love that, the extreme, curiosity. I think that's something that's so important. You have to be extremely curious these days to really unlock that next level and to catalyze change, right? So I think to me, it's been a part of who I am all the way through. So, so let me tell you about my catalytic journey, if you will, as the question is. My catalytic journey has been defined by, a deep commitment to innovation and passion for integrating, parts of art, science, and nature into everything I do. And I didn't really quite know that until I started on my journey of discovering myself. I've been an artist since I was a child, which was an interesting thing that I didn't realize would be helpful as I moved along in my journey. And one of my career highlights that I'm most proud of along this journey was when I took the leap to start my own company. I had been in the biotech industry for so long and spent some time in high tech as a finance and strategy professional, and then realized that there was something missing. And I took this big leap to go off on my own and create the path of my own creation, which took a lot of courage and curiosity to make that leap. And it opened me up to so many things that I never thought was possible. So this experience taught me the importance of blending strategic thinking, and the human-centered approach to drive meaningful change, not just in myself, but also in other people. So my journey has been all about that, challenging the status quo and thinking, how do I push boundaries for myself and others?
Amazing. And I mean, just double clicking on that, how has extreme curiosity, either in your corporate roles or as you've been launching your own ventures, how has that helped?
Well, I mean, oftentimes, and this is something I see a lot in people who I talk to, is we sometimes settle for what we hear first, the first thing that people say. And I know I've been a victim of that too. Oftentimes people say, you ask a question of, hey, how do I do that job? Or what does it mean to be able to step into that role? And people say, well, you need an Ivy League degree for that, or you need to be able to have this experience to do that. And, you sometimes put your head between you put it down low when you say, oh, well, I guess I don't have that and I can't do it. And so then you move on and you go back to your desk and say, I will settle for what I have. But that is not what we do. That is not how we catalysts do this. We think, well, how else could I get that? What else is possible? What if we do this? And so that questioning and continuing to push on and say, maybe that's a limiting belief that person has that they're pushing on me. which I don't want to accept. So those questions start to push the boundaries of what we think is possible. So that's where questions have become important to me.
I love that. It's so interesting because catalysts often end up in roles or assignments or whatever, like where they feel like the imposter too, like the imposter syndrome. And so I'm wondering how your extreme curiosity could help someone who's feeling like that, like, ooh, I really want to take that role, but I'm not sure that I have the right skill set, or I've been given this big project. Am I really worthy?
Mm. Well, and I'll start with this idea of the imposter because I think there's something about that which I've really gotten to learn a lot about this idea that if you're starting to ask yourself, am I worthy? I don't belong here or that kind of stuff, then it's really the starting point of you are on the journey to discovering your true self. The only people who ask themselves, am I worthy, are the people who are worthy of that thing. It's actually a feature, not a bug, of the best people, the most successful people in the world. And so lean into, why am I asking this question? And what is starting to bubble up inside of me that is requiring me to ask that question. So lean into it, ask more questions, start to see where the edge is on that question. Make
I
sense?
love I love that permission and sense
Mm-hmm.
of grace for ourselves. Yeah, that's
Mm,
beautiful.
mm.
So you've described some attributes, but I'm curious how you personally relate to the concept of catalyst.
Yes. Now I did spend some time, studying chemistry in school, and so, but I wasn't good at it. I was a pre-med major who switched into business because I'm like, I can't do this. So, anyways, that's probably a little too much information,
Not at
but
all. We want to get to know you, Tony, all the ways.
but to me, I mean, a catalyst, the concept resonates deeply with me because it's all about seeing possibilities where others might see limitations. And we've talked a lot about that already. And, having the courage to take action, even in the face of uncertainty, which I think is important. Um, and as a catalyst, I'm driven by the constant curiosity and the desire to create meaningful impact. I talk about that as like the big part of my work is helping outliers create an impact without burning out. So I think as a catalyst, how do we ensure that we create impact without burnout? And I know that resonates with all of you, with both of you, because it's right inside of the work that you're doing. It's in the book.
Okay, how
Even
do
the
you do
title of the
that? How do
podcast.
you help the outliers create massive impact without burning out?
Yeah, I mean, the starting point is really getting to see what is truly at the core of who they are. What do they value? Why do they do the things they do? And understanding what's at stake for them not being able to do their work. Yeah.
It's such a great reframe because people often say that we look like we're comfortable with risk and ambiguity, but that last piece is often our framing. I just got off a call with an executive and I was like, this is how you position it. It's like, here's the business challenges. I have a proposal, but the risk is not trying this. It's totally ambiguous and I don't know what it might be,
Yeah.
but we have to try something, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like how along your way being a catalyst has supported you as an executive and a change leader.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think for me, I think the biggest part of it has been it's driven my drive to innovate or to do has been it's been hard to really balance that flow of like how do I keep on moving and pushing the envelope, but also make sure that I don't push too hard on the fray of what people are comfortable with. And so it's been great to be a catalyst, but also understanding that it's driven by the right purpose, that there's a purpose behind it that is truly mine. And I think that has been something that's a struggle, but also it's excited me is to make sure that I'm aligned on the right path of what I most want to create in the world. So I hope that makes sense. I can clarify.
Do you think that's harder for catalysts to figure out?
Totally. I think so because, sometimes we just love change for change's sake. It's just we get excited about disrupting and putting things out in the world and action, but we need to slow down. Slowing down is where the Wonder Twin powers unite, is when you slow down and you see, okay, maybe I'm moving too fast. and
Yeah.
I'm not able to see clearly where my purpose is put to its best use.
It's so interesting, and I have never honestly thought about that question. I'm not asking you a question that I at all know the answer to. One thing that Shannon and I have seen a lot in our time is that when we're doing work that we know is aligned to our purpose, sometimes that can be to our detriment
Yeah.
because we will forsake our own health, our own relationships to keep going toward it. And you add a beautiful layer too, that like maybe it's not enough to just know your purpose, but are you really paying attention to, are my values all the way up and down also being met? Am I giving too much at this moment? Have I set boundaries, and do I know what that means? And so really interesting layers to add in. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and maybe I could take it one step further, which is
Yeah.
something that I think is an important part of making sure you don't burn out and you create that right level of leverage, which is to engage others in what you're doing so that they can feel like they're part of this journey you're on. You know, if you're the leader of a team and you're saying like, I have an idea that I think is going to be game changing or could move the needle, um, but you need to make sure that you have built relationships and you've got people are part of the equation. The power of people is what creates that sense of I'm not just burning out because I'm doing it all myself. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just, the martyr who's sitting there trying to do and saying like, oh, I got this.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, it's like, oh, I've got a team of people who get it and they're
Mm-hmm.
excited about the mission and they're feeling
Mm-hmm.
this energy about what we're doing. And they're going to question me on, hey, this isn't making sense now. Let's push
Mm-hmm.
back a little bit.
I- I'm gonna ask a different question, but it may come back to this very
Okay.
point that you're talking about, which is I'd love to understand for you as a Catalyst executive, what have some of the biggest challenges that you've experienced and how you've overcome them, what your learnings have been. And I am curious if this same theme will pop back up.
Yeah. So your question is, what is the biggest?
Biggest challenges you face as a
Yeah.
Catalyst executive and how you overcome them.
Yeah. I guess the biggest one is when you have a vision of what you see, but you let other people's authority and their influence cloud that vision,
Mm,
and then ultimately leading to a conflict. So I
mhm,
mean, I was leading the charge for this implementation of a really powerful platform in an organization I was working at, and it was going to really change the way we strategic plan in the organization and really interesting stuff. I knew exactly what we needed, and it was sophisticated enough, but not too complicated. You wanted to make sure that it could actually run the system. But then these executives came in that were sponsors, and they're like, well, we wanted to be able to do this, and we wanted to be able
yeah,
to do that, and we wanted to be able to do that. And before you know it, it becomes this monster. And
yeah.
I didn't have the forethought to push back and say,
Mm,
no, no, we have to stay the course on what we've designed here. This is the
mhm,
vision. And when we implement it like this, it's going to do exactly what we needed to do.
mhm. I
And
I'd love
that's the
to. Oh,
challenge.
sorry. Go ahead, Tony. I didn't
Now
mean to.
that's what I ran into is
Yeah.
sometimes you have to stick to your guns and say, even though you have more authority, I know what's going to work and I know what's not going to work.
I love that. And I'd love to kind of let folks in the audience into something that you and I know, right? You're a member of our Catalyst Leadership Trust, and you know that we recently did some research with the Catalyst Leadership Trust members. And we built this model of what we see as Catalyst executives, what they're doing to be as successful at leading organizational change as they are. And so there's an interesting tension in what you're pointing to that I'd love us to unpack, because one of the key things that we've noticed are so unique with Catalyst executives is the deep reading of the system and the bringing lots of people in and their inputs and being able to be iterative and flexible for that environment and that timing. And so how do you gauge, because you're absolutely right, there is a point at which you also have to hold firm.
Yeah.
How do you live between those two needs?
Yeah, it's a great question because you don't want to, you're not running you're running a democracy to an extent. It's like
Right.
it's a flexible, democracy that you want to be able to make sure people feel that sense of having input, but
Mm-hmm.
also understanding, what are the things that are non-negotiable, that that by at the end of the day, these are the things that need to happen. And I think one of the things that's really powerful that helps to guide this is to have set principles, and that when
Mm.
you start a program or you start something out, you lay out, these are the principles we're going to live by, and they kind of set the tone and they set the way that we, as a team or as an organization or whatever it is that you're trying to organize, will allow others to know, okay, these are the things we're not going to go against. So they ensure that everyone else, when there's pushback or when there's a change in scope or there's something that happens, these are the guiding lights, if you will. Yeah.
I love that because I'm assuming then there's probably an opportunity for discussion on when we might want to iterate the principles.
Sure.
But if you have these voices coming in saying change this and that, and there's a violation of the principles, then it gives you a way to have a conversation to say, hey, we can talk about that. However, before we become that flexible, here's something that we said.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, and there's a couple of companies that come to mind, and some of them are admired, some not so much, but like that use principles as ways to keep people on task. And I think the key thing is you've got to make sure that you live by them. And like you said, you have a protocol for when do we need to violate them if need be.
Yes.
The
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Linda Hill's work, who was kind of one of the
Yeah.
early pioneers in looking at how are companies truly good at driving innovation with teams. And this
Mm.
is such a big element of what she talks about, but I hadn't seen in her work, and maybe I'm forgetting about what do we do when there's a moment that might need to either violate them, but more change them,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it violates a strong word. I think
Sure.
change them is a better way to look at it.
Well, but it might be also not change them, which is part of
Yeah.
what you're saying, that looking back for you, in your executive roles, that maybe you became too flexible at times, and that
Yeah.
having the principles to be like, whoa, might have been like, no, we aren't going to violate these. It would have been so
Yeah.
helpful. Want to also,
Can
oh
I
yeah, go
can
ahead.
I just want to ask a follow-up question because like I have a personal thing about not living life with regrets, but I still have a few. And one of them is around sort of what you're talking about, which is um, like the holding firm or the asking the bigger questions or like just putting out there, because there does come a point where if it's too out of sync with our vision, we're sad, we're not living our values, we're burning out and all of that. And so there's this tension of, I wish I'd been bolder almost, is the way
Yeah.
that I think about it. But like, let's be honest, when you have a salary and a career and all of this stuff, there's a lot of risk that comes with that. And so I'm just wondering
Yeah.
if you have advice for like when to hold the line or go big and bold versus just be like, okay, I can play smaller now.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll answer this in two ways because I think there's elements of this which we need to there's caveats. Number one, what's at stake? Is it you don't want to be holding your guns or like putting a firm stance on everything. It depends on how important it is to you and how important you're willing to go to bat for that particular issue. Like if it's okay, what color are we gonna make this I don't know what fonts are we going to use. I'm not saying that. Probably design people in the room are like, well, that's so important. We have to get the font right. But if to me personally, I'm like, well, that's not important. I'm not going to go to bat for that. That's not a good use of my social capital. But for me, making sure that we're thinking about what's good for the user, or because I was coming from a place of being in biotech for most of my career, it was always thinking about what's going to be the best for the patient, right? And I think that's an important aspect. So don't choose your battles if you think about it that way. But the reason why I'm going to bring a little caveat into this is because I just had a conversation with somebody about like taking big risks, especially as you get on in your career, and you start thinking about like, well, what if I take a big risk and it puts my career in jeopardy? Well, the question that I start to come up to is this, is a sense of like, being quiet does not serve anyone. And even if there's a lot at risk, you being quiet is just holding you back and the rest of the
That's
people
exactly right.
around you. So be careful about what you're being silent about. There's a question I ask a lot of people in coaching them, is that what you tolerate is what you get. So be careful about what you tolerate. And so when you're staying silent, you're tolerating whatever it is that is not acceptable to you.
I would just add, again, just building on the conversation I just had, like bringing back your extreme curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, it's also the being quiet can obviously be detrimental, but there's an interesting intersection of not being quiet, but asking the questions and bringing the curiosity behind that
Yes.
to unblock things. That I don't know if that's going to make sense. For my own personal journey, it makes a ton of sense. But all right, Tracy, back over to you.
So, Tony, not only have you lived as an executive in organizations, but now you've been supporting teams and organizations. And I wonder if you have kind of different insight into the challenges of leading transformation or for catalytic leaders now that you're on the support side and really helping them work through them.
Yeah, I mean, it's taken on a whole different ball game for me. I mean, and let me start by saying, because people might think like, oh, every industry is the same, and every team is dysfunctional in their own unique way. They are. The thing that I've had a beautiful experience, especially over the past few years, has been this opportunity to work with companies in different industries and seeing how the challenges, they show up in different ways. For example, when it comes to dealing with setbacks, when it comes to, in biotech, it was a very different way of dealing with setbacks. And how do they, have to deal with all their stakeholders and voicing to, different regulatory agencies. They know that everything matters. Everything that they say is a major catastrophic event if they say something wrong. And when it comes to more creative disciplines, it's, they want to make sure that every little detail matters. Like they think about like, well, how are we saying this to that person? And how do we make sure that we get these little things dialed in correctly? And it can be, you have to be really mindful of each different function and how they're operating. So there's a lot of different nuances to the communication. And so I really have seen a lot of different perspectives in terms of how teams work together. And I think that to me has been really valuable. But it's also wonderful to be able to know that, as people come together, the most wonderful part of this is to make sure people are connecting and understanding each other. To me, that's the underlying theme of everything. The more we get to know each other, the less likely that there's a malice behind our connection. I mean, behind our arguments. The arguments are more about like, hey, how do we, I don't agree with you. Let's see if we can find a better way, or let's yes and this. And it's more about that in the sake of a better, way of working together, as opposed to holding tight and being silent and saying like, oh, I can't wait till this jerk gets fired or they fall on their face.
I love the build in this relationship. That's that intersection of curiosity and relationship building. That's for you with yourself, right? What really matters to me, and where am I willing to bend and be flexible? Where am I going to need to hold a boundary or decide this isn't the place for me? And then extending that to others and having that kind of beautiful, virtuous cycle be the thing that's going to help us be in relationship to creating change. And that what I'm hearing you say is foundationally the change is about the relationships with yourself, with others, and seeing what's possible at this place at this time.
Yeah, I want to say something that might not come together quite seamlessly, but I'll try it. Is that the work is us. The work is not the work. The work is us. And ultimately, what it means is that, we have to show up and express ourselves in a way that allows other people to truly see what we're trying to bring to the table, what we're trying to to bring to the conversation. And ultimately, through that messaging and how we create that messaging authentically, hopefully, the better off the work becomes. It's not about, oh, we've got this brilliant idea, and then because the idea is so brilliant, it will stand on its own. No, it's all about how we converse around the idea that makes the idea better. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It's a mic drop, and I don't want to like follow that up with anything. I'm like, it's so great. I will say though, like I completely agree, and it's so like I have a mission statement about helping the world's largest companies become more sustainable in every sense of the word. But the work that we do now and the way that I intersect with that is by helping people with their personal sustainability, which underpins all of that. And that's everything that you're talking about. And how we show up is the foundation for all of the systems that we're building on top of it. So it can't be inauthentic or short-term focused or all of the other things, because you just can't. It's like a house of cards then. It just won't build sustainable structures.
Yeah. And the more we hold back parts of like, well, like, we have this thing we really feel, but we don't want to say it because we're afraid that like, well, like, the people in tech ops are going to say no. Well, maybe they won't. And maybe it's worth bringing that to the table and seeing what lands and, see.
You're connecting with another place. I don't want to make this all about me, but I'm having all these insights. But it's just like the learning to ask for what you want can be really hard because it can be scary. And so this goes back to the boldness that you were talking about before. Like if you don't want Horizon 2 or this kind of change, that's fine. But that's not aligned with my values, right? And so helping the catalyst get to the point where they have the clarity, but the cojones to ask for what they want, right?
Well, you bring me to something that I want to share because I think it's a powerful shift that that made me change the way I see the world. And a hat tip to Peter Bregman, who's one of the people who I really admire in the world. Peter said this thing to me, and he said, he wrote it in a book. He didn't say it to me directly. And it is, if you're willing to feel everything, you can have anything. Yeah. And what I love about that quote, and it comes from his book, Leading with Emotional Courage, in the sense of like, if you lean into the idea of like, I'm willing to have the courage to say the things that are, truly in my heart and in my mind, then what happens is it opens the door for possibilities that are endless, right? It allows you to take the leap into the things that are unknown. It allows you to have those conversations that you think could be opening the door for anything. It's about reaching out to the person who you are scared is going to say like, absolutely, or to not respond. Like if the person you admire who you'd love to have on your podcast, it's, you reach out to them and say, hey, I'd love to have a conversation with you. You inspire me. Having the courage to say that, dealing with the potential rejection or the ghosting is all about saying, no, I let go of that.
Yeah.
Right.
It's an interesting segue because being a Catalyst executive or even a Catalyst entrepreneur or whatever can be a lonely journey. You're misunderstood, you're moving too fast, like all of the things. And having people who are in your corner, I can say, at least for me personally, helps with the bravery, right? It's like, actually, you could ask for even more potentially this time. This is not the most insane request that you had. So I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about how, communities of catalysts have played a role in your journey or potentially what they're doing now.
Yeah. I mean, a very, very big hat tip to my, CLT Catalyst Leadership Trust, which has been so wonderful. And I'm, new on the journey, but it has been wonderful to be in a group of people who are, pushing the envelope in their different worlds. And it is a difference maker. I mean, one of the things that I often say is that we do our best thinking in community with others. There's no doubt about it. I can't be sitting here in my office and, alone and think I'm gonna solve the world's problems by just thinking it out. It's not gonna happen. We have to be in community with other people who think differently, who have this sense of like, I want to challenge your thinking and let's see if we can bounce ideas off each other. And ultimately, that's going to make us all the better. And it reminds me of this idea that I explored in my last book, Campfire Lessons for Leaders, which is divergent minds, convergent hearts. The more that we have people think differently, come together, and have a sense of connection and respect for each other, we can leave feeling a connection. And I think that's what the world needs more of nowadays than ever before.
100%. It's one of the core philosophies. It's like, different minded but similar hearted. I love that you brought that
Yeah.
in. Thanks, Tony.
Yeah.
As we come to the end of our conversation today, often our favorite question is, we'd love to hear about your favorite catalyst, past or present, who inspires you and why.
Oh, gosh, this is a tough one. And I really, like, I could go on for days. I mean, there's so many people who inspire me, and, but I'm going to choose somebody who is more present day and alive. And I hope he's listening. One of my favorite catalysts is Adam Grant. In his work with, as an organizational psychologist and author, has really been game changing. And as you can probably imagine, like he pushes people to think differently. Think again is the name of his second to last book, which just got me thinking about how, like, we often get so mired in patterns and into one way of thinking. We need to always be challenging. Oh, what if I'm wrong? What if the world isn't flat? I'm being jokey, but I think that's the thing that we always have to be thinking is, how do we come into community with other people and allow ourselves to be so open-minded that we're okay to lose the face of saying, like, oh, maybe that thing I said was not right, and it's okay. Yeah. And so I think he's the person who always comes to mind when I think about, like, someone who's a real catalytic thinker, whether he knows it or not. That's someone who always gets me thinking about this.
Yeah, he's such a humble guy. I love that, like, throwaway sentence of whether he knows it or not, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, his work in the originals was one of the few things that was already published when Shannon and I were doing initial research. There just was so little out there about the fire starters and folks that we talk about as catalysts. He had a slightly different frame in which he was looking at it, but it was a huge inspiration to the work we were doing. So,
yeah, if I were to choose one other person, just because I want to put this in there, I'm an architecture and museum geek, but I just love, like, the architects like Buckminster Fuller and the people who really push the envelope on, like, thinking, how did architecture, it didn't have to always be so rigid. It could be like, a circle, or we could start pushing things into different forms and start to bring a whole different angle to the way we look at buildings. And I think that those are the people who really got me thinking, wow, the world doesn't have to be so rigid.
what is it you like about that? I'm so curious. Like, how does that impact your life? We haven't had a lot of folks bring architects.
But I'm with you, Tony. I totally agree with your perspective, and it changes
Yeah.
everything. Like the impact on our mind of all the right angles that we live in. Totally.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, for me, it's architecture. I mean, and buildings in their own way, they've influenced us so much since the beginning of time. Since the beginning of building buildings with pyramids and the early buildings of Europe and Asia. And the thing is, and you come into, like, the more modern times, we got into this period of just, like, everything was a box, and it was boring, and it was just non-inspirational. And then we started to see people coming in and saying, like, no, like, we need to make circles. We need to make, things that kind of made us feel something. And when I think back to my early life, and I don't want to go off on a tangent, when I was a kid, I used to do drawings and paintings that were about environments that had feelings and emotions. They weren't boxes. They were colorful and really vibrant places that we wanted to live in. And the teachers that I had, they used to always say, like, man, you've got something going on here. And then I stuffed that away and said, oh, I'll become a doctor. And of course, I was a pre-med major who then switched to business and was lost for many years until I found my way back to what I love doing now.
I love that the work that you do now helps reconnect with that spirit of curiosity and exploration.
Yes.
My daughter is an artist, and she's almost angry as we drive through downtown Seattle. And she tells me all that I just hate that they're all rectangles. And I'll be like, but that one looks cool. It kind of, and she's like, it just cut a line a little bit at an angle, Mom. It is still a rectangle. Like, oh, you're right.
But it is interesting for the world of Catalyst, because I feel like, I mean, I go on and on about this too, but it's like designing for the least common denominator or always designing just for quote unquote efficiency actually doesn't make the world better.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing.
Tony, it is such a joy every time I get to be in space and time and conversation with you. So thank you for granting us this time today.
Oh, this was wonderful. You bring the best out of me, so thank you.
Well, let's do it more. And thank you so much to the listening audience. If you'd like to learn more about how to create bold, powerful change in the world like Tony does, be sure to check out our book, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, or go to our website at catalystconstellations.com.
And if you enjoyed this conversation like we did, please take 10 seconds to rate it on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And of course, if you have other catalysts in your life, hit the share button and send a link their way. Thanks again.